And while people are typing in hello and letting us know where they're from and what their expectations are for today, I would like to introduce myself here. My name is Chris Gentry. I am a Manhattan Prep GMAT instructor. I teach several types of classes from Manhattan Prep. I've been doing this for quite some time now. I started doing actually started doing standardized test work with the LSAT back in 2003. My goodness, that is a long time ago. Um, and sort of progressed forward in other types of standardized tests as well. Welcome, Peru. How are you today? Um, I have taken the GMAT several times. I have taken the new edition of the GMAT, several practice tests and official test once, scored 725 or 735, I believe 735. So in the 99th percentile. And found it very interesting, the things that are new versus some things that are still kind of the same. And I was actually very pleased to find out that reading comprehension really is still reading comprehension on the GMAT, which is a good thing to know. This is our second of 3-part seminars on reading comprehension. We're looking at various types of passages. Today we'll be looking at specifically social science passages, but there are 2 other parts. Part 1 was recorded a few weeks ago, and you can find a link to that in the chat. And part 3 will be presented in a few weeks as well. So, mastering GMAT reading comprehension. Mastering reading comprehension is, it exists on 2 levels. The first level is, and this sounds strange to say, how to read. There is actually a strategic, a tactical method to reading passages on this test. And so that's the first level. The second level is very much about the wrong answer choices. And we want to discuss both levels today. We're going to start with this. We're going to start with one passage. I'll give you a few minutes to read it, and we'll discuss what we do while we read it. So I'll go ahead and put it up here. And I'll give everyone, let's say, 2 minutes to read. Feel free to type in the chat your reactions to the passage as you have them, or just let me know if you're done reading before I stop a stopwatch. But everybody take a few moments, just read the passage. Thank you, Peru. I know everybody loves silence in a YouTube presentation, but seriously, we have to be able to just sit and read the passage. Peru Laurencia, else who'd like to contribute? What did you notice? What did you find interesting in this passage? What I like about this passage, and really practically all GMAT reading comprehension, is the ability to look at a passage and go, I see contrast, I see conflict, and I can use that to my advantage. I have separate elements, an X versus a Y, an alpha versus an omega if we want to go. Um, we start with this idea of during and immediately after a war. Yeah, if during and immediately after a war. Then we have 10 to 15 years later. That's what we look for in reading comprehension passages. We look for elements that show these contrasts. So look for this and we say during and immediately after, we have trumpet the glory of sacrifice, unquestioning patriotism. Put in here glory in quotes, because that's a term directly from the passage. Morally fraught and sometimes pacifistic movies 10 to 15 years later. I'll put in here maybe fraught. And we can break down the whole passage in these two frames. So what I have here during and immediately after, I have the glory side, I have right in World War I. In the fraught side, I'll have all quiet on the Western Front. We have Guadalcanal Diary during the Second World War. Then we have Bridge on the River Kwai on the fraught side. Green Berets on the glory side. And then finally at the end, we mention Apocalypse Now and Platoon on the fraught side. We can break down this entire passage using this framework. So, this is how we read. I know it's strange to say, how do we read? But there's a strategy to this. There's a tactic to this. And I like to do this in every single reading comprehension passage. And remember, everybody, please like this video if you're finding this helpful. The more likes you have, the more people will find this helpful as well. So, Peru, Florencia. Feeling good about this. Elsewhere, we use this. Begin working on some questions. Take a few moments. Please type in the answer you would select in the chat. I would find that quite fascinating. What is the main point made by the author? Main point questions are about big picture ideas. You want something that incorporates the entire passage. You do not want something that is too extreme or too constrained. And this is where we get to some of the more test strategic elements here. The idea of looking for wrong choices that are wrong because of the way the choice is written and not because of anything that has to do with the passage itself. Answer choice D is going to be wrong. And it's going to be wrong almost no matter what the passage says. I'm curious. Drew, you mentioned D with a question mark, meaning that you're concerned about it. There is a specific word in answer choice D that should give us a lot of concern. And again, I want to be very clear that I hope you're liking this and liking this video. The idea that there is a system to the way this test is constructed that we can use to our advantage. The film industry only supports military conflicts while the actual conflict is taken. That word only is exceedingly strict. And we need to read that word with a lot of concern, a lot of trepidation, and say, I don't think you can prove that. To say that the film industry only ever supports military conflicts in this particular set of circumstances, that's too strict. Words that are too strict or too extreme in reading comprehension answer choices are just really, really significant danger signals. Now, conversely, can, suggesting possibility, suggesting a lack of certainty, that's actually a very good thing in answer choice. These are trends that exist in reading comprehension answer choices and that are universal reading comprehension, and it does not matter what the passage says. You can have extreme passages that you can, they do exist, but this type of phrasing and word choice selection in the answer choices is very, very consistent, and we want to use it to our advantage. Now, as for the rest of these, um, A, answer choice A, cultural and artistic communities, plural. We've only spoken of one community, the film community. I cannot prove A. Has become more culturally diverse. While I believe that is a true statement, I can't prove it from the passage. Is there a particular cultural pattern? Yes, there is. We have a two-sided pattern, films made during and immediately after war versus films made in a decade to decade and a half after that war. And then I can support choice C, choice E, determine the type of films produced by Hollywood more than individuals. I don't know. Passage never mentioned an individual. And so on the GMAT, we would absolutely want to go with answer choice C for two reasons. The first is it can be proven from the passage. The second is it fits the strategic elements that we know are patterns in correct choices on this test. The lack of extreme language, the reflection of possibility, but not certainty. How are we feeling about this? Curious what reactions we have to this in the chat. Another one. Now, this question has a different element compared to the previous question. The previous question, which of the following is the main point? Which of the following is the primary purpose? Nothing in the question itself directs us to a particular place in the passage. But here, We are directed. We want to know about the bridge on the River Kwai. And so we look at this sentence right here. When the question tells you to go to a particular place in the passage, go there. Don't fight that instinct. Don't feel like rereading elements of the passage is a bad thing. It's a necessary thing. You are not meant to. I suppose it's just an interesting idea, the idea of reading comprehension. What are we meant to comprehend? You're meant to comprehend points of view. You are not meant to comprehend all of the details, all of the specific elements in the passage. You are meant to go back to the passage and look for elements when a question tells you to. So what do I know about the bridge on the River Kwai? I know that it was first published in book form. I know that this is about the moral confusion. I know that this would be in the decades after a war, part of our X versus Y framework. And so I will look for an answer choice that reflects that concept. Right, take a moment. Take a look at the choices. Choice A. It supports the author's view. The author only had one view in this passage, that you can divide films about war into two categories. Films that are about glory versus films that are about morally fraught issues. The author never gave us a view about something being better or worse than another. We don't have that viewpoint from the author. It put forward the pioneering portrayal of the moral confusion of war. What we have here in answer choice B is again a word choice issue. The word pioneering, that is a curious word to use here. This was the leader of a particular type of film. First, we don't have that support in the passage. I just know that it was winning awards, and I know that it was about moral confusion, but I don't know that it was a leader in a particular field. Secondly, if anything, this might be contradicted by the passage because The Bridge on the River Kwai is not the first film to fit that moral confusion aspect. All Quiet in the Western Front is the first film mentioned, but even in this passage, we're not told that All Quiet on the Western Front was the first film ever of its kind. I don't have any pioneering portrayals here. Again, we are seeing this idea that the word choice in the answer choices is something we can use to our advantage. It is more extreme, more assertive than the passage can support. We have to stay away. A more realistic depiction of war than the message in Guadalcanal Diary. I don't know about realism. I just, the passage doesn't tell me what is more realistic. We may have our own opinions, we may have our own expectations, but the passage doesn't tell us that. It incorporated the negative aspects of war. I see negative aspects when I see moral confusion. I can find some support in the passage for that component. More so than did the message in Guadalcanal Diary. And this is where it's interesting because this is where the X versus Y concept can be used to our advantage. If we come back to where we were first making notes, we see that Bridge on the River Kwai and Guadalcanal Diary are on two opposite sides of our X versus Y element. That's what we want. We have an answer choice which can be proven from the passage and an answer choice that reflects the X versus Y elements. Oh, I'm liking choice D. More similar in tone to the message in Apocalypse Now than to the message in All Quiet on the Western Front. Again, here's where we can use our X versus Y elements here. Apocalypse Now and All Quiet on the Western Front, those two films were on the same side. Those were, for the purposes of this passage, essentially the same thing. We don't want to differentiate them. We want to acknowledge the similarities, not their differences. Go with D here. Again, I would love to read any reactions in the chat. Are we having fun with this? Are we having fun with this idea that there is a strategy to this that we can use to our advantage? Are we ready for a new passage? This new passage is about an artistic medium that I am quite intrigued by. I don't know enough to think that I'm an expert, but I do enjoy jazz music. It might take a few moments. If you're done reading the passage, let me know whenever you're done. I want to make sure that everybody has time to read, though. I mentioned that this passage is interesting to me because of just my interest in jazz music. But there's more to it that makes this passage interesting as well. You occasionally see this pattern in GMAT reading comprehension passages. It's a passage that is built on two levels. And we have a way to visualize this, that X versus Y concept here will show up again in this passage, but it's going to show up in two levels. We don't see it as immediately here. But as we get in this first paragraph, we begin to see that there is European influence and there is West African influence. European influence versus West African influence. The European influence here, um, musical scale and harmonic system. played predominantly on European instruments. The West African influence is in its performance, um, s- vocal scatting. I so wish that I could do this. I would love to do a quick little performance there, but I am just not up for that. And probably none of you would really want to hear that. But oh, hearing a jazz performer that can do that well is just a wonderful thing. Emphasis on improvisation. First paragraph, we have one level of an X versus Y, the European influence versus the West African influence. In the second paragraph, we have an intriguing aspect here. And the second paragraph starts with two basic words which are so beautiful for us. Some musicologists. The moment you see a phrase like that in a reading comprehension passage, I want you to think, thank you. You have already built a framework for me to use. If some musicologists argue a particular position, there must be a counter position. One is the idea that it is purely American, pure in quotation marks, because that's just sort of an adaptation of the term that the passage uses. And then there is also the idea that it's about confluence, that it's not about singularity, it's not about purity, it's about building from multiple aspects. Um, the pure part point to the fact that it is from New Orleans. And now we see something that happens in passages, and when we see this, we want to learn to love it. All of this in the first paragraph is essentially fact. Some musicologists, that's a point of view statement there. Others, however, that's a point of view statement right here. But these last two sentences, those are different. Those are special. Learn to recognize when the author is speaking to us. This is the author right here. The author is putting themselves completely on the confluence side, plurality of roots. Rich and complex history. This is our passage. Notice that both passages have this element of an X versus Y, a contrast or a conflict. This passage is perhaps a touch more subtle than the previous, and this passage is, in my opinion, a little bit more developed than the previous because it exists on two levels, but it exists everywhere. This is how we read reading comprehension. I hope you're enjoying this. Hit the like button if you are. Help other people find this. This is what we want from our passages. And now we go to our questions. Take a few moments. I would love to have you put an answer choice in the chat. I want to see that you're trying these. Give it a shot. Word choice again in the answer choices. Always word choice in the answer choices. demonstrate. Where is the author giving us a demonstration? Is the author performing for us? Is the author showing us this? The author may be describing it, maybe explaining it, but they're not demonstrating. Describe a medium's diverse cultural genesis and a relevant paradox. This is again, look for word choice, look for matches here. A medium. A medium here would be jazz music. A diverse cultural genesis is your confluence. A relevant paradox here maps to this irony. Every component of answer choice B can be mapped onto the passage. This is what we want. Thank you, Sudhir. Thank you, Peru. Argue that a new art form has its origins in the geographical location. No! The author here is trying to argue that this is going for a confluence, a complexity, a plurality of origins. Describe the impact of African culture on an American art form. Answer choice D would be great if it was just the second half of paragraph 1. The second half of paragraph 1 is great for answer choice D, and if that's what this question had asked, answer choice D would be a great choice, but it's not for this question. Claim that one culture had a greater impact than another on the evolution of a new. Again, this is the opposite. We are trying to discuss the plurality, the complexity. We're not trying to pick winners and losers in a cultural influence war on jazz music. We definitely here go with choice B. Again, you see the word inference tossed around a lot in reading comprehension questions. Critical reasoning too occasionally. Reading comprehension more commonly, and it's always the same game. There's this thought that the word inference means to somehow make a prediction or to establish the next step of some type of argument. That's not what an inference is. An inference is all about what can be proven from what you were given. We want our answer choice to be able to fully map onto the passage, and choice B here can. Take a few moments. Consider this one. Give me answer choices in the chat whenever you're ready. I'm actually about to go back to the previous passage in the first question we looked at because I want to show continuity in some of these concepts here. Again, I hope you're liking this. Like it. If you like this video, help other people find this. This is an interesting one. The word only in answer choice D, all the way back in the first question we looked at, that word was too restrictive, too extreme, too absolute. I'm laughing at myself because I'm currently playing a video game called Baldur's Gate 3, and one of the villains in that game is something called the Absolute, and using the word absolute now has an amusing context for me at the moment because of my experience with that video game. Um, Oh, my goodness. My apologies. I went to the follow-up question to this one. Let's go back to the question we were actually looking at. Here we go. Choice C, the word most. Most sports scholars. You mean to tell me that this passage has given us information about every single sports scholar that has ever existed in the entirety of human history, and you have given me enough information to tell you something that is true about the majority of all sports scholars who have ever existed? I doubt that. That is too extreme. Next, what we see here, Aslam, I think C and D tell exactly the same things. There's actually something in C that also exists that is a little bit more extreme than in D. Deny the English origins. Just to say flat out, no, absolutely not. The author of this passage is not going that strongly. They have their own opinion, but they're not calling out others for being absolutely not. I would go with D over C here, um, but we'll come back to that in a second. What we look at here is next we can use the tone of the passage. This passage, for all that the author is saying that some musicologists argue something, this passage is fairly positive, saying that something should not be called an American sport. This person was not arguing that jazz is not an American music form. This person is arguing that what makes jazz American is the plurality of its influences. But they're not trying to say that jazz was not American. So that element in B and E should give us great concern. Choice A, although American football was derived from English sports of soccer and rugby, it should be called a purely American sport because it was first played in America. Choice A is the some musicologists. Choice A is for the some musicologists in the first sentence of the second paragraph, that it is a purely American form of music, that its genesis is in New Orleans, and that is why it is in this perspective, because it was first played in America, because of its where it came from. The author of this passage is not on that side, though. The author of this passage is about the plurality. We actually want choice D here. What makes American football American is its derivation from two elements, soccer and rugby. What we have here is two influences. Choice D is our best option. Is choice D perfect? No. No, it's not. We won't see perfection in most answer choices on this test, especially in the verbal section. That's not our goal. That's why it's a multiple choice test and not, a short answer form test. I would have preferred an answer choice that says what makes something something, and they show two different cultural aspects. We spend the entire first paragraph of this passage talking about how there's European influences and there's West African influences, two different cultural influences. That's what I would have liked, not just two different sports. Soccer and rugby, they're two sports, they're different sports, that's great, but they're both English sports according to answer choice D. And you look and say, I would have wanted multiple cultures, but we don't have that here. And we're not giving that any of the choices. This will sometimes be a game of which choice is the best of my options, and choice D here is the best of our options. Now, I think C and D tell exactly the same thing. Again, note that D is again, it's about like a tone issue. D is a positive assertion. We're telling you, the author's saying, here's what we do know about this sport. C is a negative assertion. Here's what is not going to happen. And we follow the tone of the passage. The tone of the passage is more positive. It's telling us what jazz is. It's telling us what the author finds fascinating about jazz. Take a few moments. Again, I would like to hear the thoughts and concerns in the chat. I wanted to show all of you this question because I wanted to show all of you that the GMAT cheats. This is not a reading comprehension question. It's put next to a reading comprehension passage, but it's not a reading comprehension question. And the GMAT will do this occasionally. A reading comprehension question should be, here's what is true from the passage. That's not what this question is asking. This question is asking us to argue against the author of the passage. This is a critical reasoning question. This is a weakened question. And we need to shift our mindset occasionally and say, this is not reading comprehension. This is not the idea of what's true in the passage. I want to argue against someone here. And to argue against someone, you first have to define what was their argument. The author's argument in this passage is that jazz is American because of the plurality of its influences. That is the position of the author of this passage. And if I want to argue against that, I need an answer choice that would go against that to show that there's not a plurality of influences. Choice A, New Orleans was not the place where jazz music was first played. That's interesting, but that doesn't tell me about a plurality of influences. For avant-garde musicians from different cultural backgrounds, this would strengthen the author's position. That's the opposite of what we wanted to do here. With the influx of West Africans came a very specific West African musical style. That would be a singular influence. That is the exact opposite of the author's position. Let's hold on to choice C, because that is my weakened construct there. Draws more of its character from South American and Native American traditions, but again, that would still be a plurality of influences. Choice D, like choice B, would actually make the author more inclined to label jazz an American art form. The instruments were predominantly of Western African origin, not European origin. Honestly, E is a second best. E is trying to show fewer influences. But choice E fails against choice C because choice E, you still have the idea of the European scale, the European harmonic system. There would be still some plurality of influences, even if choice E is true. And so choice C is our strongest component here. Now, if anyone watching this, whether you're watching it live as we are right now, or if you're watching the recording, if you're a little bit frustrated by this, I feel that. I'm frustrated by this when it shows up on the test. It's frustrating to have to code switch in the middle of the test. Where in the context of reading comprehension, we want reading comprehension questions. We want what is the primary purpose? Why does the author say this? We want things that are in the passage. I want answer choices that can be mapped to the passage. And I wish it was always like that, but I cannot lie to you. They will do this to us occasionally. Recognize that some reading comprehension questions require us to flip out of our reading comprehension mind and go, wait, no, this is critical reasoning. And when you are faced with this, when, not if, because it will happen, when you are faced with this, recognize it and make that switch and say, I'm not looking to just reflect what was in the passage. I want to define an argument and I want to change that argument. And the first aspect is always going to be defining the argument. The first thing we had to do in this question is, what was it that made the author think jazz is an American art form? I hope you have all enjoyed this look at reading comprehension with some specific examples. Um, I want to take a moment here and just give you a quick shout to the word choice game that we can play in answer choices here. Be very, very concerned about extreme language in an answer choice. Only is probably the worst. Should is also an interesting aspect in an answer choice because should implies some sort of moral obligation, and you're not usually going to have reading comprehension questions that are trying to impose a moral obligation on us. The things that are more likely are things that are going to be less assertive, things that are going to be less opinionated, describes, suggests. Um, Honestly, the word illustrate, I would say, is kind of iffy for me. Um, you would have to have, we could have used the word illustrate in the first passage. The first passage could have used the word illustrate because you had actual specific examples. We had specific films listed. This passage would be something that would allow the word illustrate. Our second passage about jazz music, honestly, probably not going to have a word illustrate show up in a correct choice here because we didn't have any specific examples. We didn't mention any. We didn't talk about Miles Davis. We didn't talk about Coltrane. We didn't talk about Thelonious Monk. We didn't talk about specific albums. And so the word illustrate for me would be kind of on the fence here because to illustrate something, you have to have specific examples. But that's what we're looking for here. And remember, I mentioned here a moment ago about an inference. We think that an inference is a prediction. It's not. If I can have just a few moments, what would you infer from the statement that chocolate ice cream is my favorite? You might be thinking something like, well, Chris likes chocolate, or Chris likes ice cream. You don't know that. I may not like ice cream at all, but if I'm put in a position where I need to eat ice cream, like there's somehow some kind of a social obligation, I'm at some sort of a party where the host is offering ice cream as the dessert, and I do not wish to be rude. And so I will absolutely partake of the dessert they offer because that's a courteous thing to do. I may not like ice cream very much, but when I'm going to choose it, I would choose chocolate. What can you prove from this? Very, very little. You can prove things like Chris has opinions about ice cream. You can prove something like Chris would choose chocolate over vanilla. You could prove well, let's not say prove a negative because that's always a risky, mindset to establish. But let's say you can acknowledge that a negative exists. Vanilla is not Chris's favorite. Just as a side note, chocolate ice cream is not actually my favorite. My favorite ice cream is actually fairly specific. I like vanilla ice cream with a chocolate shell sauce on top of it. I love it. You get the best of both worlds for me. And maybe just vanilla chocolate is kind of pedestrian, kind of, ho hum, but man, that just hits me in a way. I love it. But that is my inference for this. All right. I want to thank all of you for working with me here today. I hope that we have seen that reading comprehension passages are more strategic. They're not random. They are constructed with very specific purposes and very specific um, aspects that we can take advantage of. Look for a division in the passage. Activate that part of your brain where you're finding those divisions. And then always ask, does the author put themselves on one side of that division? Find that out. When you look at the answer choices, study the wrong answer choices. You want to map the correct answer to the passage, but that's actually, ironically, sometimes more difficult than looking at some choices and go, this choice is almost certainly wrong because blank. For more of this, go and get started with resources that are available to you on manhattanprep.com. Make an account, take advantage of the free stuff that we have there. Um, Go ahead and get to work on that. And then finally, we see here that, you can get a $75 off a GMAT GRE or EA complete course. Um, Use that. Absolutely use that. But I'd also like to point out that just go to a course. All of our lesson ones are free and open to anyone who registers as a trial student. If you've enjoyed this, if you found this helpful, obviously hit that like button. Again, as I mentioned here a few times, please do that. It helps people find this video. We want people to be helped. So please do that for them and for us. Um, but also, again, show up for a class one. If you've enjoyed this, if you want to learn more, join us. Hopefully, I'll see you soon. You always mess with inferring the main idea of the reading comprehension. Shashikant, the the golden rule for main idea is find that conflict. The main idea is always going to be around that conflict. Where do I have an X versus Y? In the passage about movies, the main idea was merely that the conflict exists. In the passage about jazz music, the main idea was the author exists on one side of that conflict. The author was saying, you say that jazz is American because it was uniquely from New Orleans. I say that jazz is American because of the plurality of its influences. Find that conflict and you will find your main idea. I want to thank you all very, very much. I want to wish you all the best of luck. And you're going to remember this is part 2 of 3. Part 1 exists on YouTube already. You can go find that. Part 3 will be showing up in a few weeks. So hopefully you have enjoyed this and those, and maybe I will see some of you in some of my classes in the future. Thank you all, everybody.